today, the animal experimentation, and then getting into sensory input. Now we're going to look at deep brain stimulation, and next time we'll look first of all at therapeutic uses of neural interfacing, which will include deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease and epilepsy, but we'll also look at one or two other interfacing neurally for therapeutic purposes, and then we'll have the sort of middle presentation will be about human enhancement, which for me is the most exciting bit, the possibility of extending. And it has to be, despite what Miguel Nicolelis might say, I think it has to be inspired to a certain extent by science fiction, to have all sorts of crazy ideas. And then we'll have a look at some of the more political, ethical issues to finish off. So this mainly is to do with what is deep brain stimulation. Well, it involves surgery, implanting electrodes of a particular type of electrode. Mainly they are used for stimulating, which is why it's called deep brain stimulation, which means pushing in current into the brain to affect how the brain operates. But they are simply electrodes, so we can also use them to measure pulses. So they can be used to change what's going on or to understand what's going on, as perhaps I'll describe next week. But the main use in so therapeutic purposes is in terms of stimulating, applying quite a hefty current. The first, I mean, there was various, we've heard of some of the different experiments that have gone on. The first official treatments commenced in 1997. This was for Parkinson's disease. The guy that really discovered it, a chap called Bernabid, who's French, why he has not got the Nobel Prize, I will never know. He fully deserved the thing. And it was really his work that... so it's not... It was in terms of long-term studies, what happens long-term, we still don't really know. This is, 14 years ago. So even commercial products and so on, you're only looking at what happens over 14 years. Nobody's had these things in their brains for longer than that. Most common use for Parkinson's disease, to a lesser extent epilepsy, and I'm going to look at that next time around. But as we see, also very useful for depression, and there can be side effects. So we're going to look more at these weird and wonderful uses of it, and what some of the side effects are, and so on. Is it bionic? Well, I think definitely it is. It's affecting biologically how the brain's operating in response to electronic stimulation, so it has to come under the bionic effect. So we're going to look here, what is deep brain stimulation and how it is being used presently in other than Parkinson's disease. Again, when we come to Parkinson's disease, we'll show an operation in process as long as you're up to it, so don't have too much for breakfast next time around. So this is the person's head. We're just starting the nasty stuff, so you time it well. The person's head is held in a clamp. It has to be held firmly in position. It is, the deep brain stimulation really is used for dealing with the serious cases where everything else has failed, or if chemicals have been used as part of the treatment, the effects of chemicals have worn off, that sort of thing. Surgery can last for over 10 hours to put the things in place, so it's not, it's not what you do out of choice on a wet Sunday afternoon. And test signals are used. Typically, what happens is, dependent on where the thing is going to be positioned, the surgeon will literally drill down a very, very thin drill into the brain to the point where, sorry if you're eating, this is going to put you off, but drill down to the point where the electrodes are required. We'll then take the drill out, and then we'll push the electrode on the sort of spindle into into the brain. So the electrodes are positioned deep in the brain. 3 elements, I don't know whether the colours show to the whole thing. Maybe it's obvious. You've got a pulse generator with a power pack, contains a battery and a stimulator, how it's going to stimulate the thing, in a titanium housing. It's positioned here, typically. There's all this space we've got here, and the power packs and this pulse generator are positioned here. And that's the main driving force. The pulse, the power pack, the titanium thing that's there, if you have a look on Wikipedia on artificial heart, the heart pacemaker, you'll see a little picture there of a titanium housing. And it is exactly the same piece that's used. The casing is a little bit bigger for this because the power requirements are a little bit more. But it's exactly the same companies that produce heart pacemakers, that produce things like companies like Medtronics that produce this. And this is what the IPG, the pulse generator, is this little power pack, this little titanium housing that's used. And there are connections to it which then go, this is what are called the electrode leads. It's in polyurethane with 4 to 6, electrode leads, this is what's positioned in the brain, and then the extension wire connects the two things together. So the extension wire will be plugged into the power and the pulse generator, and then will go into the electrode leads which are in the brain. The electrode leads used to have about 4 electrodes at different depths. Nowadays they have about 6. So a little bit more flexibility for the surgeons. And that is really, here, this is the thing that's in the person's brain, this is the brain, and the electrodes are positioned like that. They're not actually sticking out, so they're at different depths into the brain. And first of all, the surgeon, when it's in position, will try and adjust the positioning and be applying currents at different frequencies on the different electrodes to see which one works best. So for Parkinson's disease, in a sense, it's easier because if the person has tremors at that time, the surgeon can alter the current and the positioning and see when the tremors die away. We'll see that next time. For other issues, for other problems, it's not so easy, particular problems that occur from time to time. The electric lead in position, the extension wire goes from here underneath the skin, so it's subdermal, up around the back of the head and into the where the electrodes are. And the surgeons will optimise the position. Dependent on what the problem is, I don't know that this is the case for Parkinson's disease, but I'll probably do an MRI scan to link. For epilepsy, that's certainly the case. Doing a scan, first of all, to see exactly where in the brain the electrodes are going to be positioned. For surgery, the patient, as we talked a little bit earlier, just has local anaesthetic. This is just at the point of the incision, so it's to stop that sort of sting you get from the cut. In the brain, there are no pain receptors, so once you're drilling in and pulling out pieces of the brain, the person doesn't feel anything at all. So craniotomy, so drilling into the skull, and the DBS lead is placed unilaterally or bilaterally. So again, it depends on the problem. If it is both a right side, left side thing, then it would be 2 electrodes, placed one on the right, one on the left. It may be you're just dealing with something that's happening on one side. So if it's something that's happening on the right-hand side, it will go into the left side of the brain and vice versa. So it depends on the symptoms as to whether you have 2 stimulating leads or 1. You might use microelectrode recordings, which I think they do some research going on in that here, to more precisely locate the target. This is sort of part of the research that's ongoing. And then once the electrodes are in position, then all the rest, the power packs and all that, are connected up. Typically, the patient would have these electrodes positioned and essentially would be open. It wouldn't all be stitched up and put in position for 1 or 2 weeks while some experimentation is carried out to see where the pulses are best applied and what pulses and so on. So it's not like it's all done and off they go home the next day. The brain, when the electrodes are put in first of all, the brain can adapt in certain ways, and you need things to settle down a little bit before you see long term. So for Parkinson's disease, this is the sort of typical thing. We're looking at the electrode into the brain and then the different points for stimulation. But you're looking right into the centre. That's why it's called deep brain stimulation. We're not looking at some few electrodes on the surface of the brain. It's going right down in. And hence, again, it's not something you do, oh, let's try that. It's not something you do unless you've got a pretty serious problem or you are completely crazy. This means that this part of your brain, a very, very thin section, admittedly, but that part of your brain is drilled out, really. That the surgeon will drill into that, to drill that tube, and then push the electrodes down there. So, I don't know, even I wouldn't necessarily go through that sort of surgery just for experimental purposes. I don't know, maybe in time. Uses. Main uses for Parkinson's disease, no question about it. Potential use, it is being used. Tipu, I showed you his picture before. For Parkinson's disease, 1 a week. He puts in one for one patient a week, typically. For epilepsy, 2 or 3 a year. It's that sort of thing. And I'm not sure in the UK whether anyone else, just one surgeon in one hospital, is using this type of treatment for epilepsy. I'm not sure whether anybody else is. For Parkinson's disease, I think there are about 6 hospitals in the UK. Here, is it Homolka? I mean, maybe there are more. So there is. But Bratislava's another country nowadays, isn't it? I know it used to be all the same place. It was the same place when I first came here, I have to say. And they were a lot more radical down in Bratislava, I think, when I first came here. They were all ready for, in the 1980s, they were all ready for I don't think they wanted a velvet revolution, they just wanted a revolution. But there we go. Prague were much more velvet type. Anyway, main use for PD, but also epilepsy. And this is what we're going to look at today, is these other things. Clinical depression, Tourette's syndrome, obsessive compulsive disorders, severe persistent pain, phantom limb pain. So we're going to have a look really what these things are. So this, to say, is again serious cases where any other treatment doesn't seem to be working. We'll have a look at what these things are. And this is the use of deep brain stimulation to counteract the effects of these things. At the moment, deep brain stimulation has been used for the treatment of these things. That's what I'm saying. It's not that it could be used. There are lots of other neurological problems, and deep brain stimulation could be used for that. Some sort of stimulation could be used for treatment of so it's very much a research area, what could be possible and what's not.
So the human brain can keep on living with the electrodes stuck inside? For
yes.
long time span?
Well, the long time span's a good question. For Parkinson's disease, which I said there's about 40,000 people around the world that have had this treatment. Typical onset of Parkinson's disease, average age is about 61. Life expectancy is about 9 years, to be honest, average number, so some people. So typically when it's first diagnosed, you would be given the dopamine, the levodopa, the chemicals. And then after, for some people that effect can wear off quite quickly, but usually it would take a few years. So typical treatment, you might be, you're expecting to live 5 or 6 years with the electrodes in position. So it's that sort of thing, but could be potentially longer statistically. I mean, I don't know what the world record is, if that is such a thing, but it wouldn't surprise me if there are people that have the thing for about 10 years. Yeah. My wife has a friend, an Indian woman, she has Parkinson's disease, she will not go ahead with the treatment because of what it looks like. Because no matter how much you have wires underneath the skin, they push up a little bit, and she more from this. I mean, we think she's crazy because the effect it can have on her as a person is dramatic, but she doesn't want to. So not everybody does want to go ahead with it. But I think for a lot of people with something like Parkinson's disease, there's no question that their life is shit. And now they can have a life. And for some of the other things, like clinical depression, it's really when a person is likely to commit suicide. They really are likely to kill themselves. All right, let's use this, as we'll see. Now, what is clinical depression? Well, depression, I think probably most people get depression. You feel down. I'm a supporter of Victoria Zhishkov. I am used to being depressed, particularly this season. You feel there is no hope at all. They're going to get relegated. But I still live. I get by, just about. Clinical depression, the definition, is if a doctor agrees with you that you're depressed. Literally, this is what clinical depression is. A lot of people think they're depressed, but the doctor says, get out and get a life and chill. What it actually is, feeling intensely sad, where there's no apparent reason or no motivation to do anything, but it really is the extreme case. You may feel tired, sad, irritable, lazy, unmotivated, apathetic and so on. And deeply down, life is terrible, we're all going to die. Lots of negative thinking can lead to abuse, self-harm, and this is where we get to the extreme end. Extreme depression can culminate in the person attempting suicide. Lots of cases there. We've just had a case in the UK, the manager of the Wales football team, were doing remarkably well, and he killed himself, hung himself. Turned out it looks like he was just extremely depressed. Why? Nobody seems to know. Some people, it's that sort of thing where the triggers, the reasoning for it, the first thing a psychiatrist may try and find out what is it that's causing you to be depressed. And if you can find a trigger or a reason, then let's deal with that, or let's manipulate the way your brain's thinking. But this is where there isn't. You're just so down, depressed. It's more of a neurological thing, perhaps. Electric shock treatment has and still is being used as a cure. Also called electroconvulsive therapy. Short bursts. 0.9 amps. Now, I was saying before 350 microamps was a fairly hefty. This is 900 milliamps. Bloody hell! It's passed into the brain and creates a brief seizure, which amazingly links with epileptic fits. I mean, it's all connected together. Things that we have witnessed with our little cultures, the rat brains as they're growing, is like the same sort of thing as these sort of seizures. The whole of the brain, whoosh, neurons will fire en masse and create other neurons to fire. And partly it seems to be part of the learning process early on in the brain, but here it's used almost as a clearing process. I mean, it really has been found to be successful. The patient receives 3 treatments per week over a 3 or 4 week period, so they go through, it's not the sort of thing you want to do if you have a choice. And you may need repeat sessions, so they go in for a month, we'll have this electrode. So this is not the deep brain stimulation, this is the alternative, I guess, if there is an alternative. Ends up, unsurprisingly, with memory loss, disorientation, headaches, not surprising. It has a fast response, which is one of the reasons it's used. If somebody is about to commit suicide, this is something that... But unfortunately, the response doesn't tend to last unless you get back to either maintenance electric shock or maintenance medication. So this really is used as a very last resort. Antidepressants can take quite a time, maybe a month to take effect. So if you are a doctor and somebody comes to you, I'm heavily depressed, saying take these tablets, they're going to be dead before the tablets have an effect. So this has been used because of the speed of treatment and so on. And obviously there's a lot of controversy over the use of electric shock treatment, but it is still used. I think most countries around the world, certainly up in Bobnitze, the hospital up there, I know it is used in extreme cases, so better not record that. Deep brain stimulation for clinical depression, it's an experimental method, but it's practical. It is being used in extreme cases for this thing, where drugs and even with ECT where that has failed. So somebody that's likely to commit suicide. The target is the frontal cortex, so we're looking more here, not right in the centre. So it's easier to get to in that state. And this is the nice thing. When the electrodes are switched on, the patients describe it as a black cloud lifting. Suddenly, isn't life wonderful? That sort of thing. They become more interested in life. And again, this is constant stimulation is being applied, but much less current. And it's shown to be successful for clinical depression. It works for some people. But because it's just a small number of people, the exact positioning, the current, and is really, there's a lot that's not known. It's not like, oh, we know exactly what to do. As soon as you switch the electrodes off, the person is depressed again. So it is literally electronic control, applying an electrical pulse to part of the brain to overcome the effect of clinical depression. And there's alternative areas that are being tried. So this is the nucleus accumbens, which is the same area in rats that we talked about in monkeys for pleasure. So this is to give a pleasurable signal to counteract the effects of the person. Similar sort of results. Where is the best position? Even for Parkinson's disease, there are about 3 different positions and different surgeons feel this position is best, that position is best. That's after lots of research. Tourette's syndrome. This is something, there seems to be quite a genetic thing to it. It seems to be quite an inherited thing rather than something that you suddenly develop. Although it can be several generations. Typically it at first appears in childhood, so if you haven't noticed it in yourself, it's unlikely you'll pick the thing up or anything like that. Either it's physical tics, so the person will just, without any stimulation, would sort of go, particular, this is me trying to pretend to be, or vocal, and the vocal ones can be swearing word, that someone says, dopadele, or, or something even worse, in the middle of the street, or to people. and to do that in a repetitive way, and then suddenly just walk on with their life, and then suddenly go through a burst of these things. So this is what Tourette's syndrome, or a combination of the two, the physical and the vocal, the photonic, which clearly it's not life-threatening for the person, but socially they're not going to become president or prime minister with those sort of features. They're not really going to get on in life. So it's really where a normal life is. So this is interesting. They don't, with Parkinson's disease. If you've got Parkinson's disease, well, you've got about 9 years to live. You're not going to live as long as if you haven't got Parkinson's disease. With Tourette's, it doesn't. Life expectancy is about the same, whether you've got it or not, which is interesting. Can be very intelligent and doesn't affect that at all. And this is a critical factor. A typical onset is as a child, and it can reduce as you get into your teens. So when you're 18, 19, it may be in some people it's disappeared altogether. And that, therefore, counteracts the reasoning for putting electrodes in. If it's going to stop anyway, then putting deep brain stimulating electrodes, why should we do it? Shouldn't we wait and see if it's going to go away first? For one time, it was regarded Tourette's as quite rare and quite bizarre. And they said this, stating some obscene words. Actually, the ones that go swearing, when I say obscene words, when dopadella is nothing compared to, they can really be socially awful, as it were. But they have all sorts of echoing and repeating. So you're talking to them and they're just saying the same thing back to you and so things like that. So a lot of social issues to it. Treatment for mild cases, it can be just psychological treatment, educating, reassurance and things like that. There's no known cure. Different drugs help with different types, dependent on what it is. Interestingly, 20% of people with Tourette's don't realise they have Tourette's. So they can be doing this, but they don't know or say they know anything about it at all. One of the problems with treatment is because they only swear at certain times. They're not swearing all the time, and they only have the tick at certain times. And therefore, if you're putting electrodes in, knowing where and how to stimulate, it's difficult. You can't just stimulate without stopping that. So there can be a period of time that you need to experiment for that particular person. And it has been used experimentally successfully in a few patient cases. These are the surgeons that have done this are very much going out on a limb for experiment. They're sort of not quite central surgeons, as it were. They're trying specific cases. And with long-term benefits, we don't know, because it's all in the last 2 or 3 years the experiments were going on, so no idea. There's complications due to short battery life. All cases that have been tried on experience a reduction in the ticks. Some, I think a couple of cases, they sort of as though they hadn't had the thing in the first place. Lots of questions though. Short, long-term risks, we don't know. Exact positioning, we don't know. And then this thing that is not so suitable for children because the problem may go away. I think I've got about 3 minutes, so I'll just... Another place that deep brain stimulation has been used is obsessive compulsive disorders. This actually is listed by the World Health Organization as one of the top 10 most disabling illnesses in terms of ruining your life. So although we tend to think it's a bit strange, this obsessive compulsive thing, World Health Organization, it's important. And it is showing signs of infatuation or fixation with a subject or object, perfectionism. Well, you don't necessarily have obsessive compulsive disorder. But clearly there is a line there when, like depression and clinical depression, you get to it and you go past it, and yeah, it's there. But the line in any one person is a bit of a fuzzy one. Obsessions, recurrent persistent thoughts that cause distress. This thing, important for the person to recognise obsessional thoughts, can be difficult. With a lot of neurological diseases, the person is thinking a very different way. Handling over very, very small details. I think I've got some examples which are probably, and compulsions, with some fun examples. Here we go, examples. Repeated hand washing, just your hands are never clean enough. Clearing of the throat, although it doesn't need it. Arranging objects in groups of 3. Hopefully none of you are saying, yeah, I like that. Hopefully you're not saying that. Grouping objects in odd-numbered groups. Counting steps. I mean, probably we all do. I think I do. I'm going to mislead even with steps. We all do some of these things, but this is to do it obsessively. You have to do it. Aligning objects in particular ways. If you have bad thoughts, you must cancel them out with good thoughts and strange things like that. Obviously, it's partly doing this fun. Sexual obsessions or unwanted sexual thoughts, because we never have any of those. Fear of contamination. Both sides of the body must feel even. So if you walk and bump into a wall, you've got to go and bump into a wall on the other side. Obsession with numbers, so you must have even numbers, to the extent if somebody shouts out 9, you become terrified because it's an odd number, things like that. Twisting the head on a tongue, all those sort of things. But this is doing it in excess. It's, your whole life is run by this. That's where we're going here. Deep brain stimulation has been tested and it has been shown to be successful on extreme cases where the person, they just can't live and so on. Everything else has failed. Lots of questions in the medical world as to whether deep brain stimulation should be used for things like that. And we don't, whatever. Even with Parkinson's disease, we don't really know what's going on in the brain. No long-term results. And side effects, which is what I'm going to skip to, just to conclude, with pain was the other thing I was going to look at. But dealing with pain, the same sort of things. Various side effects have been reported for using deep brain. To include hallucinations, hypersexuality. It means, boy, you need it every few minutes, that sort of thing. Compulsive gambling. So this is somebody who has probably never placed a bet in their life, and with the deep brain stimulation to overcome whatever is the problem, suddenly they have to gamble. Which means, what is gambling? What's going on? Can make the person depressed. Cognitive dysfunction, apathy. So these are seen in, say, these are small number of cases, side effects. Extreme cases, of just a few cases, it has appeared to cause the person to attempt to commit suicide, or voyeurism, which is a strange thing, side effect. It could be due to the electrode shifting, to bleeding, and possibly the thing, obviously not suicide, but it could be reversible. So if you change things slightly, then everything's all right again. But I have to say, these problems are a small percentage of the total, and you have to say, what was the original problem? And deep brain stimulation is tackling the original problem, but in some cases you get the side effect. And you never know, with things like depression, it might have occurred anyway due to the illness, so you can't tell. Okay, a few comments. Deep brain stimulation, still very much in its infancy. Where are the electrodes going to be positioned? It's only used in extreme cases because the person's likely to either commit suicide or their life is hell, as it is. Relatively speaking, it's a handful of surgeons around the world, so still experimental, particularly for things like obsessive compulsive and pain and things like that. Potentially it could be used for lots, anything neurological could be tackled. Schizophrenia is one. I don't know that there's a reported case of deep brain stimulation being used for schizophrenia. Would be an enormous area if it could. A lot of people affected by that. But again, where to position the electrodes, big questions. Electrode positioning generally, frequency of signal, magnitude of the signal, still lots of investigation going on, even for something like Parkinson's disease where things are fairly well known. Okay, there we go. Sorry I went 3 minutes over, apologise profusely. I'm not sure the next or last set where we do human enhancement and therapy and things like that. No, I know I will be over at the end of January, so that's one possibility, and then I will be over at the end of March, beginning of April, which is another possibility. But I'm not sure which ones yet Olga will pick up on. So she might poll round and see when people are more in tune. But I know the end of January I'm going to something up at Spindler of Mleen, AI conference. I'll be about the last week in January before that. There we go. So I have to stay tuned as far as the next one. It'll either be late January, more likely I guess it will be late March, early April, something like that, before Easter. Good. So see you again next time. Well, thanks a lot. Again, if anybody, by all means, email me, or if you've got any related questions with projects or whatever, I might not be able to answer the things myself.